Hello, everybody. This is your host, Carlos Toro of the Toro Boxing Podcast, and of course, the sole proprietor of Carlos Toro Media. But I am not the only person talking about this Charlo doubleheader and this very, very long card and even longer weekend of boxing. Joining me here, really the first time on this channel. I've had him on Fightful's boxing podcast when that was still a thing. And the God knows how long ago it feels like. But without further ado, Marquise Johns is here. How are you doing, buddy?
Pretty good, Carlos. Great to be with you on your version of the podcast as opposed to the old MySpace era when I was on with you on the old Frightful goodness.
And listen, I wasn't expecting to have a guest on this one. I was expecting maybe, I'll do this solo, maybe I'll do like a 20-30 minute. But with you here, it'll be a little bit more interesting, to say the least, or at least a lot more entertaining than some guy, as I keep saying on the Toro Boxing Podcast, some guy just talking to a webcam for 30-40 minutes, or sometimes in the podcast an hour.
Yeah. That's no problem, Carlos. No, it's a fun weekend of boxing. Actually, lots of stuff went down. Lots of hardware moving as well. I'm actually looking forward to all this stuff. Actually, it was pretty good stuff to this weekend.
Yeah, so if anybody that is listening wants to submit a question, wants any feedback, let us know how we're sounding, or just want to talk about the sport or about the fights that we've had tonight, there's a lot to talk about. Dropping them in the chat, and don't forget to hit a like, subscribe to the channel, share it on social media. Would really help the visibility of this show and of this channel. But without further ado, let's kind of start from the start to the beginning, from the Charlo card, because this alone we can spend forever and ever just talking about it. But before we kind of get into the actual fights, what was your grade for the overall card?
Actually, Carlos, I thought this card was pretty good. The one thing that everyone was saying going into it was, outside of people questioning how much they want to pay for it, was what version of these fights were going to be, because no one in general was going to question the actual fight card itself. It was just how long it was going to be and how much. And I mean, granted, the fight card took a little long on some of the fight cards, but for the money's worth of it, this was a fine card. Solid fights up and down. The only letdown on this fight card that I missed completely was apparently, as everyone knows, that they had the first three fights, Carlos, and then they had this weird intermission section. And I came back and people were complaining about the intermission. I guess everyone forgot the definition in Google for intermission means a break or rest period between events. So we got that. And personally, I thought it was fine. I mean, I went to the store. So, I didn't miss much.
No, I mean, I took the break to, get a chance to talk to Jermall Charlo after his win against Sergey Derevyanchenko, which you can check out on this channel. I just posted it not too long ago, about 90 seconds, but it was, he gave me some interesting quotes, especially when I asked him about Sergey Derevyanchenko's just bruised up and busted up face. This was something. We'll get to that in just a second, but let's start first with the first fight, John Riel Casimero versus Duke Micah for the WBO bantamweight title. This was good. This was fun for what it lasted. It only lasted a few rounds, but Duke Micah came to fight. There were times where he actually was landing some pretty good body shots. Both guys were flashing leather from the very beginning. John Riel Casimero scores the knockout, or really the stoppage, I should say. Scores a couple of knockdowns overall in the fight. This was a statement performance. This was a hell of a fight for, it was pretty short, but it was something. And I think this really showed that John Riel Casimero really is, at worst, the number 2 guy at 118 pounds.
Absolutely, Carlos. And the one thing about the fight that opened up this fight card with Casimero was everyone was waiting for, the unification bout. I think that was before the pandemic broke out between him and the Monster, and all of that pretty much at this point led us astray. Hopefully that this knockdown of Micah, who at one point was game, but he was just clearly outmatched and outgunned at one point. And it made me wonder, because this fight went, Carlos, to the 3rd round, and at one point you begin to realize why. And it's just kind of one of those deals. But this was this, as you mentioned before, Carl, this was a statement win for him. And it has me more craving the fact that I want to see the unification bout now with Castanero and Inoue, which I really thought was when we were going to get to have before everything went down with the pandemic. And I'm pretty sure Inoue's going to get after the Maloney fight. this conversation will kick back up again as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of us knew that Gianriel Casimero was the goods. I mean, just following his career and even just following his recent run in bantamweight. I mean, it's nothing short of incredible. It was in very compelling, very competitive fights against Ricardo Espinosa, which was his actual U.S. debut. Contrary to what everyone in the world wants to say, this was actually Gianriel Casimero's second fight in the United States. Not even 18 months ago. It was his U.S. debut, which is amazing. I get it. I think that was an off-TV bout, but come on. It was for an interim WBO title. It was on a very big night of boxing, I know, because it was on the same card as the Danny Garcia, Adrian Granados fight, and I was literally on 3,000 miles in New York at Madison Square Garden covering the Terrence Crawford and Amir Khan fight at MSG, but, I mean... Yeah. If people didn't know about Gianriel Casimero, they certainly do now. And for those of you who have been wanting or on the fence about Naoya Inoue versus Gianriel Casimero, man, this is the fight. Like, this is one of the best fights in boxing that you can make.
Yeah, and if you don't know who Castanera was, by the way, that's funny that we're once again we're mistaking folks who don't fight in the U.S. for their debuts as if it never happened before, and despite records and stats and things like BoxRec being a thing to let people know that they fought in the States before. That's always fun to me too. And also with Castanera, though, I remember when he won the belt from Tate last year on one of those miserable Queensberry cards where and the only reason I remember Carlos was like, I think his fight on that Queensberry card was like the first one out was like, all right, you guys get on there and get in and get out. And I want to say he beat like Tate, I want to say it was like 2 to 3 rounds. It was quick work last year. And no, Castanero's gonna be a problem. And I really like the fact that there's gonna be so many fights that can be made at that division, and it's just such a great thing.
We now move on to the second fight of the evening, at least on this Charlo card. Brandon Figueroa versus Damian Vasquez for the WBA World Regular Secondary, whatever the hell you want to call it, super bantamweight title. This was fun for the first 6 rounds or so. Then it started to get very troublesome because Brandon Figueroa, he was banging away at Damian Vasquez, but it got to a point, especially after the 6th, 7th round, where Damian Vasquez was just getting decimated. He was getting hurt. He was getting destroyed out there, and his face was just really, really messed up. Like, you talk about Derevyanchenko, Vasquez's face was pretty messed up late into the fight, and this was a case where it was the old Antonio Margarito situation where and everyone knows the fight should be stopped, but because he's still fighting, the referee's not going to stop it. And Damian Vasquez, God bless him, his chin, his heart, no one should ever question it ever again. Mm-hmm. But Damian Vasquez was getting outboxed. He was getting outlanded. Brandon Figueroa his power was on display tonight. This was a perfect showcase fight for Brandon Figueroa, but it ended in the 10th round and should have ended in the 8th round.
Yeah, no, this fight could have ended easily, like about the 7th or 8th round, and it kind of made me wonder, Carlos, where it's like either were these guys, was everyone involved getting paid either by the minute or by the round? Because referee Gary Rosado didn't want to touch the fight, to stop that all whatsoever. Vasquez's corner was telling him, hey, show something. They may stop this fight, where it's like they just really were kind of leaving him out to dry in a way. And it made me wonder a little bit, all right, so he's getting bad advice. The ref's not stopping this. Figueroa's just going to keep hitting him. And at what point do you have someone either above or just in general just pull the plug on this, where I would have thought the ringside doctors would have stepped in at some point saying hey, are you okay? Can you function? And I think at one point at the start of before the start of the 10th round, before they finally waved it off, that finally did happen, where it was all right, guys, at some point we've seen what's going to happen. This isn't going to after the 7th round of that fight, Carlos, the result of that fight was not going to change. They could have pretty much packed it up and went home, but they let it go for 3 rounds too long, and that's what had everyone questioning everything.
And it goes back to the whole question of what point do you stop a fight, even though in boxing, technically, one punch can change the entire fight. But let's be honest, Damian Vasquez, theoretically, he could have, still had a chance to win the fight, but it was taking so much unnecessary damage. And this is such a young kid, and this is the type of fight where you look back, it may have taken years off of his career. That's how bad it was getting. And it wasn't like Damian Vasquez was getting hit hard, and it was also landing some really good shots on Brandon Figueroa, and you think, okay, he was getting hit, he was getting damaged badly, but at the very least, it's still 50-50. No, he was fighting, but this was an instance where the referee, the corner, the ringside doctor, they should have stopped this fight like 2-3 rounds before it actually got stopped. That's how bad it got.
No, this was bad. And this one, as I mentioned before, this is one of those fights where you kind of wonder, like, who was leading in the corner of this, or for Vasquez to realize that this was such a good idea at what point? Or at some point, you have to know when to hold him, know when to fold him. And one of these things with these fights, and I don't know what is it going to take, or what. I really would love to know, Carlos, in the mind of some of these trainers and corners, what do they see in their fighters that wants them to keep pushing on despite everything around them showing that it's not? I would love to get in the mind of those to see otherwise, because in this fight, Carlos, like, the one thing that Vasquez was throwing back in spots, but it clearly wasn't enough, and it wasn't enough to keep him actually even to keep Figueroa off of him, one, and B, to change the course of a fight, because most fights can change with 1 punch. There was not one punch that he was throwing that was going to change that at all.
Yeah, but moving on to a more positive note, obviously Brandon Figueroa's left hand, especially early on the fight, it was hitting Vasquez right on the money. The right eye of Vasquez was completely swollen shut, and really this was a very good step forward for Brandon Figueroa coming out of the draw against Julio Cesar in a fight that really, let's be honest, I don't take too much issue with Brandon Figueroa, because one, Ceja was massively overweight, and Brandon Figueroa, he was telling me in an interview, which you can check out on this channel, before the fight, he was telling me that he was coming to the fight nicked up. He was injured. He was dealing with a couple of minor injuries that quite frankly, it did affect him at times. Now, granted, obviously, if he was healthy, if Ceja was on weight, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how that fight could have turned out. But obviously, this is a bright young fighter and a very, very good 122-pound division with a lot of young guys. It's hard to see what the future holds for him, because you could literally put him up in front of 4 or 5 guys, and there's a realistic chance that it might happen. What about you? Where do you think Brandon Figueroa fights next?
You know what? I always thought last year when we had this conversation with Figueroa, I thought he wanted Stephen Fulton at one point, and that's obviously, Fulton's going after Leo at this point. So I always wondered after that, maybe will that be something on the mind? I know he's currently one of what variation of piece of this WBA title that he has, or whatever have you. I don't know if that really holds any weight in anything, but in the opportunity of what the WBA has to offer, I would just wonder if there's anything in terms of an actual unification, or actually something along the lines of the bigger names that they have at 122. Like, I'm trying to think here, Angelo Leo would be cool if any event that he loses to Fulton. Like, maybe, in fact, give Figueroa the loser of the Fulton-Leo fight that happens, and see how he stacks up on that, and then we'll go from there, because I really do think that would be a bigger test for him to see if he actually is ready to go for the main stage.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I've been saying that ever since Brandon Figueroa won his hometown fight on that FS1 card a while back. I've said, man, the fight's probably not going to happen, but I would have loved to see Stephen Fulton versus Brandon Figueroa someday. Maybe it'll still happen, but it's definitely not going to happen anytime soon. Maybe, you know what? I definitely wouldn't mind putting Brandon Figueroa up against Aaron Alameda, who just gave a very spirited performance against Luis Neri, which we'll get into that fight a little later on tonight. But we go into the first main event, Jermall Charlo versus Sergey Derevianchenko for the WBC middleweight title. This fight was awesome. This fight may have been the best fight of the pandemic, maybe arguably the best fight of 2020. This was action all around. At first, we kind of thought that Jermall Charlo was going to be coming into a fairly wide decision victory. His left jab was just hitting Derevianchenko right on the money. He was able to mix things up. This wasn't a slugfest right from the beginning, but Jermall Charlo fought with creating angles, adding new dimensions to his repertoire, fighting a more technical style than we have seen from Jermall Charlo during this run at 160 pounds. Very, very good fight. Sergey Derevianchenko came back, and He may have been called the technician, but he was attacking Jermall Charlo to the body a lot, especially in the middle portions of the fight. But it came to a point where Jermall Charlo was starting to run away, especially in the championship rounds. It was very good. It was an awesome fight. Highly recommend everyone check this one out. Very exciting. Jermall Charlo retains it by unanimous decision. What did you think of this fight?
No, I think this was actually, Carlos, the fight on the card, actually. And the one thing I loved about this fight more than anything else was that Derevyanchenko made the adjustment. The big thing and the big knock on him coming into these championship fights was this going to be third time's the charm? Was he going to be knocked down in the first round? That didn't happen. The first couple of rounds that Charlo was winning, he was able to keep his distance from him. And then what happened was Derevyanchenko made the adjustment, was able to slip some of the punches that Charlo was throwing in and was able to come in and attack inside. And that's what made this a complete firefight, actually. And it made for fun stuff. Shockingly with this fight, Carlos, I'm surprised that no one was knocked down in this, considering as much as they were throwing around. And considering that the power that both these guys do have, I was really surprised about that. But I also was more surprised the fact that Charlo just added a definite dimension, just as you mentioned before, cutting off angles, just fighting. Actually, it was kind of at one point in the championship rounds, boxing around Derevyanchenko, which was interesting on his part, because another thing that I saw that was really interesting too, Carlos, in the fight, and it played on the broadcast. If anyone watching haven't seen it, check it back. Derevyanchenko looked small compared to Charlo in the ring, and I have seen Derevyanchenko power over people. Like the Golovkin fight, he looked taller. I thought he looked taller in the Jacobs fight, but this fight, he looked like he was coming up from like welterweight to challenge Charlo, and it was just like, oh man. But he made a good go out of it. The one thing that I would wonder for Charlo from this, now that he retains 160 for his third defense on this, is where does he go from here? Because he's been calling out the guys at 160, the other folks, the Golovkins, technically Canelo's at 160. We can take that for what it's worth. And let's be honest, Carlos, those fights just aren't going to happen. I mean, the only fight that's kind of looming him in the face, unfortunately, is one that I don't think he wants anymore at this point. Is the one with Demetrius Andrade, despite the fact that people will mention it. So I wonder where he goes from here. I just was wondering with that, where does he go? But this fight was great. Like, it's one of those things where it's like it's hard to explain like why this fight was so great outside the fact that these guys were just completely throwing hands and were able to land on each other almost anytime they wanted to do something different, and that's what made it so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Jermall Charlo, you look at everything, all the attributes that he has. I mean, I have no problem putting him as my number one middleweight. I'm not counting Canelo Alvarez right now in middleweight. He hasn't fought
he's not
at 160 pounds since May 2019, and with this ongoing issue with the zone, and with the likelihood of him fighting 168 pounds in his next fight, even when that ever happens, he's not going to be fighting a middleweight, now going to be coming on 2 years without fighting a middleweight. I don't care that he's the WBA champion there. Yeah, he's not a middleweight.
Yeah, and at some point, they'll have to take that belt from him sooner or later, despite the fact that the WBA doesn't want to hear that maybe. But with that in mind, who really with Charlo, I'm just trying to figure out who was really left for him. I know Chris Banks tried to ask him about Demetrius Andrade, and that completely blew up in his face, like one of those cartoons. But but I really wonder it may have to come back up sooner or later.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be Demetrius Andrade. I mean, I don't think the fight against Golovkin is ever going to happen. Andrade, well, the problem with Andrade is he still has a mandatory in Liam Williams, and then they're obviously, maybe not from the Matchroom side, but Golden Boy definitely grooming Jaime Munguia to eventually challenge for that WBO middleweight title, so he may be busy for a while. One name that I actually was thinking about, and I actually saw this on Twitter, and this is the name that I actually thought was really interesting. Chris Eubank Jr. I mean, he's a guy he technically is the interim WBA champion. He's fought on PBC cards before. He is a name that will attract people's attention, much in the same way, or again, maybe to a lesser extent with Chavez Jr. because of his dad. It's more or less the same thing with Eubank Jr. with his dad.
No, that may be interesting. In fact, you know what, Carlos? That's going to be the next fight. Now you mentioned that, because I even asked on my Twitter just after the fight, being like, all right, so at 160, Who beats Charlo? Plain and simple. And the names I've gotten was pretty much Triple G makes a decent fight out of it, and then everybody else said nobody. So if the next best thing at this point is Eubank Jr., then I'm all in for that.
I mean, he certainly has looked better as of late in his more recent fights. I will give him that. As much as I was not a fan of Eubank Jr. and his ability, I thought that, from a physical standpoint, he has all the tools to be a great boxer, but the talent was just so raw, so unpolished. He's starting to sort of get there. He's not all the way there, but I think that would be an interesting fight. I think Charlo will win that one, but it is a fight. It is a decent name on someone's resume.
Yeah, that would work out. And especially with Eubank, the last fight I remember seeing him very well, and it was kind of rough to watch, actually, was the one that the James DeGale fight from last year. And it was just like, So anything above that's always an upgrade. And I'm not against that one.
The scores for that fight were 118, 117, and 118 to 110, 117, 111, and 116 to 112. Final note on this. So it's hard to... We're asking right now what's next for Jermall Charlo, but what's next for Derevianchenko? Because it's hard to really tell what's next at this point. He went through Jacobs, couldn't get it done. He went through Golovkin, couldn't get it done, arguably. There are some people that still think he beat Golovkin in that one, but the record will state that Derevianchenko lost it.
It's a loss.
And now he lost this one against Jermall Charlo, and arguably his weakest performance out of those three. I saw that I saw someone mention this comparison, and it got me really thinking, and it makes a ton of sense. Derevianchenko, to some extent, he's essentially this generation's Obakar, a guy who a lot of people love, a guy who has been very, very close to the title, arguably has championship level talent, but just couldn't quite get it done against the greats of the era. Obakar wasn't able to get it done against De La Hoya. He wasn't able to get it done against Cito Trinidad. And in the case where Derevianchenko couldn't get it done against Charlo, Jacobs, and Triple G.
Yeah, interesting that name pops up. Greatness of Obakar, Detroit's own Obakar from '90s, who fought back in those days. And it's interesting with that name, and not as. But back to your question with Derevianchenko, I think Derevianchenko fights sooner or later down the line, mainly because for one reason that he got this fight the last go round. Derevianchenko, in terms of the IBF rankings, Carlos, is the best the IBF has the offer at this point. I mean, he has to work his way back up again. I don't think it's going to be as quick of a turnaround as it was these last 2 years for him, where he fought the man, Jack Kool-Aid, and then he got to face Golovkin after the Jacobs loss, and it's like it's going to take him a couple more fights as opposed to the quick turnaround, because now in these fights now he's officially 1-3 in these championship fights, or like his last 4 fights actually. So it's going to be a work way back up at this, but I don't think he's completely done. This wasn't one of those fights for Derevianchenko where it's like we fought, looking back on, because I thought the fight was fine. It wasn't like a fight where it's like, man, Derevianchenko looks like an old fighter. This wasn't like a fight we saw like with Peter Quillen or one of those Angulo fights, and it's like, man, he's still doing this. And it wasn't anything like that. So I really just think it's just more of Derevianchenko just trying to make one more final run. We'll probably have to go back to the bottom of the line and just work his way back up a little harder, and it's going to take a little longer.
Yeah, and the one thing that he does need to work on is he needs to be a better starter. Like the one common denominator in all three of his title fights, he started out slow. He got knocked down by Jacobs and Triple G, and in the fight against Charlo, he didn't get knocked down in the first round, but he arguably lost 3 of the first 4 rounds, which may have potentially been, what done it, more so than unable to really close it down in the championship rounds. The start really, really affected him a lot, especially when Charlo's left jab was right on the money every single time. So now we go into this intermission. All right, next topic, part 2 of the Charlo doubleheader.
Yes.
We are starting right now with the first non-title fight, technically, of this pay-per-view. Juan Carlos Payano versus Danny Roman in a super bantamweight title eliminator. And Danny Roman ends up winning. All scorecards have it 116, 112. Almost not it felt, if you look at the scorecard, you kind of think, all right, well, Danny Roman fought a very competitive, very game Juan Carlos Payano, but he was a better boxer. you actually look at the fight, not so much. Like, aside from Roman's run in the last few rounds, Juan Carlos Payano was really giving Roman a ton of trouble. He was doing an excellent job of luring Roman in, especially when he was in the corner. Lands that beautiful right hook. Was able to counter very well, and Roman was just trying out different things, but he wasn't committing to anything. He tried to sometimes bang to the body and would just abandon it. Then he tried to fight at range and have a little bit of success, but then he was to completely switch things around. And only then, in the last 4 rounds, was Danny Roman able to truly get the upper hand. And he ended up winning, but this was one of those fights where you kind of think to yourself, I mean, you look at Juan Carlos Payano, he is a wily veteran, but he was coming into this fight almost essentially labeled as damaged goods.
Yeah. And I thought, Carlos, not for nothing, I thought Payano won the fight. I don't know what fight they were judging, actually. And it was one of those fights where if it depends on what you like. If you like the aggression that Roman was sort of kind of doing, sort of kind of half the time, sort of kind of when he was countering, then you give him the fight. That's fair. But it was one of those things where it was kind of like the way it was spaced out. It felt far and few between. And I thought Payano at least the first half of that fight banked at least 5 of those rounds. Personally, I thought he won this fight outright. And I'm hearing the score's 8-4, and I was like, huh? All right, I need to look back at this fight a little better, apparently, or figure out what they were watching. But the one thing I thought with this too, and yeah, everyone thought coming into this fight, Payano being 36, thought he was on his way out in this fight as a whole, but I really thought it was just a very non-competitive effort from Roman, actually. Maybe, and it may have had something to do with maybe because he's been in these battles, with TJ Donaghy or the Ahmadallah felt earlier this year. It may have been some of that and then the ring rust, but it just was not, for me, really that interesting at all. I really thought Payano took it to him.
Yeah, no, it was, and it's funny because if you look at the official scorecards, all 3 judges had scored rounds 4 through 12 exactly the same, which I thought was really, really interesting. So, yeah. Roman won rounds. Let me see. He won rounds 4, 5, 6, and then 9 through 12. And if you look at those, and all 3 judges were in agreement, that's one. But you can just ask anyone who watched the fight and wasn't judging. Payano was really doing well, and I kind of feel for him because this is a fight that it technically sets Payano back. You can't give him a title shot. You can't put him in against a big name because he lost that fight. Even though I think a lot of people thought Payano probably did better than what the judges thought, it was a weird case. You want to say his stock rose up, but at this stage of his career, coming off the 2 knockout losses, 2 stoppage losses, I don't know. It's this was about as bad a result as you can get. Even if Roman had knocked out Juan Carlos Payano, at least we know, okay, well, maybe this is really it for Juan Carlos Payano. Now now Payano's in this purgatory state, which really sucks because he's in a 122-pound division that almost on a monthly basis we're getting brand new guys who are really, really good.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where with Payano, he becomes unofficially. I hate to say the Carlos, I hate the word so much, but it's just one of those words that just happens in boxing. With this loss, he becomes officially in that gatekeeper status, which is something that at his age is not going to do him any good. Because if you want to look for a title run at his age, it's not going to happen now. Where essentially they kind of pretty much chopped his knees off with this, and I kind of hate that for a fact of this, especially with everyone you mentioned before. Everyone at 118 is either going to move up, or everyone that's coming in at 122. And they showed the list of the top names at 122 that are non-title holders during this fight. And they mentioned Reese Alim, and you got guys like Isaac Dogbe who's coming back. It's a lot of names, and it's man, Payano does not fit in anywhere that mix whatsoever. And it's just and it doesn't help that the scorecards that they gave for this fight just doesn't help them at all. I really
maybe Dogbe, because Dogbe is a bit undersized at 126, and I think he's better off just working his way back up at 122 because I just don't see it in Isaac Dogbe to come in. That'd be a good fight. Isaac Dogbe versus Juan Carlos Payano. I mean, Dogbe is the guy who, against the right kind of opponent, he can create some compelling fights.
Yeah, no, a dog-based style can cause problems for whoever is in the range, especially with his stature. And something like that with Pounding would be kind of fun. And I wonder if that may be something that's going on down the line, where maybe Dog Bay had an eye in this fight, probably taking on one of these guys. Because Dog Bay on his Twitter the entire day was hinting at things, besides it being his birthday, by the way. He was hinting at some news on his Instagram, which did happen, and it's now officially past his birthday. So we'll find out what happens with that along the lines. But I really do think he had an eye on this fight, thinking that he may be somewhere down the line challenging for one of these guys.
All right, so obviously with Roman, we don't know what's going to be next for him. That it's really, we could say that a lot about the 122-pound division, but sticking to that division, we go into a fight that answers the question, can a fight that's had more than 1,600 total punches actually be boring? Turns out the answer is yes. Luis Neri versus Aaron Alameda. And maybe one of the, and arguably, the least exciting action-packed fight in boxing history. Luis Neri wins this one by unanimous decision in the one fight I think everyone would have already assumed, yeah, this is gonna end in a knockout, and this is gonna end in a pretty early knockout.
Yeah.
It was not good. The pacing of this was just horrible. I joked about it on Twitter. The pacing of this fight was about as quick as this entire pandemic has been. And I'll give maybe this fight this. Maybe if we hadn't already been gone for a long 12-rounder between Juan Carlos Payano and Danny Roman. Maybe if we weren't, dealing with a 45-minute intermission between the end of the Derevyanchenko-Charlo fight and the start of the first fight of the second half of the pay-per-view. Maybe if we weren't 9 hours into this boxing marathon for this entire day. And maybe if it wasn't close to midnight, maybe this fight wasn't as bad as we saw tonight. This fight maybe was the product of everything that was bad about the night and the timing and the weight. This fight suffered the most. But regardless, even if we were watching this with fresh eyes, this was still not a great fight. But Aaron Alameda gave a spirited performance. This was one case where a fighter loses, but his stock went up. He may not have been Luis Neri, but I bet you no one expected him to go the distance. And I bet you no one expected Alameda to be the one to throw more punches than Luis Neri. The scorecards may not necessarily do Alameda justice, but it certainly was a good outing for Aaron Alameda.
It was, Carlos. And the one thing about this fight, and one of the maybes that you forgot to mention, was maybe if this fight didn't make the air, we all wouldn't have to complain about it. But no, this fight, honestly, it was a weird sparring session, and it's funny, and I hate to say that considering how many punches they've thrown in this fight, but it's one of those fights where if you saw the pacing of it and the style of these guys, it's two southpaws, and one guy was pretty much trying to establish his jab, and another guy, and Neri was new trainer Reynoso was pretty much working out their kinks in the ring as it went by. And at one point, Alameda actually was kind of jabbing him to sleep, especially in the middle rounds of this fight. And it was one of those things where I was trying to figure out how many of these jabs are being scored as winning rounds for him. And at the end of the day, it became none of them on the final scorecards. And it's weird because I thought Alameda made it a better effort than what it should have been, because for all intents and purposes, I think coming into this fight, Carlos, I want to say Neri was negative 1,000 to win this fight. Like, it was something really huge where no one thought this was going to go past 4 rounds or 4.5 rounds. I think was the over under on this actually. And it just went the whole distance. And unfortunately, if you saw 3 minutes of this fight, you saw all 36 of it. So, but the one thing I did recognize from Neri that's kind of a concern actually on my end was that he wasn't able to figure this guy out. And that was even made more known in the championship rounds where I thought really Alameda made it a better showing than what it was supposed to be to begin with. It's one of those, this is one of those fights, Carlos, where had Alameda started this fight, or if this was an 8-rounder where he had more energy up top to get going off beforehand, this would have been more closer on the scorecards. But man, this version of Neri, I don't know. I miss the Neri that would just like maul over people like Jayon Love and other random folks. But this version of Neri, I don't like, man. I just don't like it all.
And I'll say this, and I will put out the disclaimer. This what I'm about to say is something that I believe for quite some time. This is not a knee-jerk reaction. This is not me being super reactionary or a hot take type of guy. I've long thought that ever since Neri, after the whole debacle with Shinsuke Yamanaka and the disgrace that Neri put out there in the 2 fights, Neri has not looked great. He has not looked good, especially signings with PBC. He has not given us that unbelievable, like soul-crushing performance knockout that we've kind of talked ourselves into thinking Neri's capable of doing every single night. He's looked good, but I don't think he's looked anywhere near the myth that a lot of people thought about Neri when he was at 118. He's looked a lot more normal at 122 pounds. Still a dangerous fighter, still a very, very good fighter, and you can make a good case he's the best at 122 pounds right now. But he's not an unbeatable monster. He's not a guy who will just decimate any opponent put in front of him. He's not even the guy that a lot of people thought would be Naoya Inoue's potential kryptonite. Not the guy that we saw tonight. He was a guy who tried to use his power, wasn't able to do it, showed that he has maybe average to slightly above average boxing abilities as far as technique and technical prowess. But when you look at the other guys at 122 pounds, you look at guys like Angelo Leo. He's a guy who has shown he can take a punch and he's able to fight dirty and actually pound away at the body when he can. Neri might struggle against that type of opponent. And the problem here is a lot of people at 122 pounds are going to look at this fight. They're not going to be afraid of Neri's power anymore. Now, granted, it's still something you should be very, very careful about. But but this fight, and really his run at 122 pounds, it hasn't really been that great, or at least as great as we thought it was going to be.
No, it hasn't, and I think this version, Carlos, and the next person in line for him, I'm pretty sure now he has this the vacant WBC title now, is the guy who had the belt in Ray Vargas. I think Ray Vargas gives him a world of problems when he gets back, honestly. Like, it's one of those kind of fights where he just did not look that great to me. And it stinks because even if let's say, for instance, he gets past Vargas next in line, like the next crop of lines, like, every guy's at 122, give him issues. Like, guys on the rise like Alim, like a lot like guys like that will give him issues where it's like they find a guy that's going to not fear his part, like you mentioned, and he becomes very suspect. And the one thing that Alameda exposed on Neri in this fight was Neri's inability to stop the jab coming at him, because he was at one point in this fight pretty much jabbed to the point of no return. There was one punch that Alameda threw the entire night that he kind of landed at will for better terms. It's just that he didn't land any power punches or put any spinny punches really together of any string of combinations until about the 10th round. That's what did Alameda in. If he doesn't need this stuff beforehand, he probably wins this fight. And we're talking about a heralded unknown becoming the new champion at 122.
I remember talking to Sean Porter a while back, and I remember him telling me this. When a guy moves up in weight, he doesn't carry the same power that he had in the weight before him. He needs to increase the power that he has in those hands to make up for the fact that the guys he's facing are bigger. Neri was certainly helped by the fact that he was in a division where he towered over a lot of guys. Lots of great fighters at 118 pounds, but the size was certainly something that Neri had over a lot of them. Now he's fighting guys his size, and I don't think in that transition from 118 to 122, I don't think he was able to properly carry that same power at 18 to 22. It's almost like he's carrying the power from when he was at 118 and not able to properly transfer it as a 122 pounder.
No, that makes sense. And another thing also, you mentioned that as well. It's a great take too, is that Alameda looked pretty big next to Neri in this fight also, especially stock wise, where it's like, he couldn't, like when Neri was at 118, he was able just to muscle over everyone. This time he's facing guys and he looked like the smaller man in the ring on this. And that's going to be a big problem too. And it's one of the reasons why Alameda was pretty much in this fight, Carlos, the entire way, and more like why this fight went the distance, because Neri wasn't able to land any of those anything wacky out of the ordinary, or that hook, or anything that would cause Alameda any trouble, because he was able to see it, for one, and two, he was able to just pretty much guard it the entire time. Like, nothing that he was throwing was able to get through like that. The only thing that Neri was able to do more than anything else, and I think that's what the judges approved him for, was he was able to be more of the aggressor. That's pretty much what won him the fight.
So we now move on to the true main event, the second main event of the evening. Jermell Charlo versus Jason Rosario for the unified WBA, WBC, and IBF junior middleweight titles. And this was about, not really one-sided, but this was about as definitive a win as you could possibly make and establish yourself as the kingpin of the 154-pound division. It all started off with Jermell Charlo. He landed a left hook at the top of Jason Rosario's head. It threw off his balance, threw off his equilibrium, and then his left foot slipped out of the ring and he kind of went down. Now, you can argue day and night whether or not it should be counted a knockdown. The fact of the matter is, it was called a knockdown, and we only got to really see him truly, like, the real slip on replay. So I don't blame the referee for counting it as a knockdown, because in real time, it was not something that maybe you weren't thinking about a whole lot, especially as it came with a punch at the top of the head. But Jason, he came back. He looked good. He wasn't unfazed by the knockdown. He was actually had maybe arguably his best round in the third, where he was really walking down Jermell Charlo. But then Charlo started to just find this rhythm again. The jab was effective. He was landing a lot of good shots. He dropped Jason Rosario again with a beautiful left hook. And Jason, in the fifth round, and Jason, he got back up. The bell sounded, but he was still wobbly. He was still recovering from that knockdown. And then the moment the sixth round ended, Jermell Charlo landed this just absolute beautiful two left jab combination to the body. And the second one just dropped Jason Rosario, like, completely, utterly knocked the wind out of Jason Rosario. So much so that he was convulsing. He was going to be taken to a hospital. It was real bad. Referee counted to 10, but you could count to 30, and Jason Rosario wasn't going to come back up. This was the biggest absolute statement you can make to establish yourself as the top dog at 154 pounds. Knocking out the unified champion with a jab to the body.
You know what, Carlos? The last time I've seen a jab like that, and it took me back to the old days of playing Fight Night Round 3, where you create a fighter at middleweight, and you end the fight with a jab, and the guy doesn't get up anymore. That's kind of what happened with this fight. And the one thing that happened with this fight early on, and it spelled trouble for Rosario, was that first knockdown. Give or take, it looked like it may have been a slip on the back foot, whatever have you. But the one thing that saved him was that knockdown, because had he not slipped, he was going to get caught with a right that was going to have his face pounded into the pavement, and Harvey Dock stepped in. So more likely that him having to do that 10 count saved him a lot of hurt. And that was the one thing that got Rosario in trouble with this fight, because the one thing that he was doing, essentially, Carlos, in the blueprint for Charlo, and a lot of fighters at 154 apparently are going to be doing this now, and they have to beware of this. They're following the Tony Harrison blueprint that he set out in the loss that Charlo had back in 2018. And what they were doing, as they did before, they would walk him down, they would try to cut him off, corner him, try to land as much shots as they can. But the one thing Charlo has done, and it's what saved him in this one, was he landed that hook in the sixth round that was pretty much, for all intents and purposes, Carlos, that was pretty much the knockout of the night, honestly, where once he got up, I mean, he beat the 10 count, credit to Rosario for being as game as he was in getting up after that shot. But once he got to that corner and kind of wobbled over there, it kind of makes you wonder, like, was he going to get off the stool or not? And he did. and that's when he got punched in the stomach, and that was the end of that. And the one thing that Charlo did in this fight that I thought was really interesting, because he didn't do much in terms of output during the middle rounds of this, but when he did land, it was always with bad intentions. And it's like, it's one of those things where it makes me wonder, Carlos, I'll put you on the spot with this. Now that he's the unified champion at 154, is there anybody power-wise do you think that can contend with that?
It's very tough because you look at the 154-pound division right now.
Yeah.
Erickson Lubin, I don't think carries that kind of power, and he didn't quite really impress me in his last outing last week.
Yeah.
Erislandy Lara, he's not. I don't think he's beating Charlo at this stage. Jarrett Hurd is it's an albatross at this point. We don't know what the hell's gonna be up with him, if he's going to move up to 160, if he's going to stay
I think he's moving up personally.
Julian Williams, I mean, I don't know. I mean, look, we've both heard about whether or not J-Rock was truly 100% there for that fight against Jason Rosario. That's another story, but I just don't see it in Julian Williams. And listen, and I've said this time and time again, this 154-pound division is about as wide open a division as I've seen in a very long time. You have guys coming in almost on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis, and they just establish themselves as real stars. And obviously, the hottest guy right now as far as prospects moving on to contenders is Tim Tszyu. And I still need to see a little more from Tim Tszyu before I would feel comfortable putting my odds on him against against Jermell Charlo. Yeah. But then it's hard. This is a very, very wide open division. Patrick Teixeira, I mean, we could talk about Patrick Teixeira, but let's be honest, that fight's never going to happen.
That's not going to happen. Yeah.
I mean, as much as and really, there's almost no need for Jermell Charlo to do it, even though technically it would crown an undisputed champion at 154 pounds. He may not be undisputed, but we all know Jermell Charlo is the consensus number one guy at 154 pounds. I mean, even entering this fight, Patrick Teixeira wasn't even in the top two. It was Charlo and Jason Rosario.
Yeah, and it's funny because like he didn't mention where it's guys that he's already beaten, like Harrison, and I always wondered where Castano's going to be at with all of this. So I mean, the list goes on at 154 with these guys, and no, this was a statement win for Charlo with that, and I really wonder, because I'm now putting you on the spot with this. I was trying to figure out a reason why at 154 there could be someone that can actually even contend with Charlo at this point, but for the short-term future of it, it's tough.
The battle for number 2 right now is so wide open right now.
Yeah.
The problem is, I don't know whoever ends up being number 2 can beat Jermell Charlo. That's the issue right now. Like, we have so many great fights. We have so many tremendous surprises in the last few years in 154-pound division that we're now it feels like the dust has settled. We know Jermell Charlo is number 1. Maybe Jarrett Hurd. Yeah. Maybe Jarrett Hurd could be the guy, but again, he might be moving to 160. So the one guy that Jermell Charlo hasn't beaten, that fight might not even happen. Jarrett Hurd might as well just say, screw it, I'll go to 160 and I'll fight Jermell Charlo. The hell, that's actually another fight for Jermell Charlo that we didn't even consider. Jarrett Hurd moving to 160. Because, let's be honest, Jarrett Hurd has a long teased moving from 154 to 160, and we don't know when the hell he's going to come back to fight. We still haven't heard anything regarding his in-ring return. So maybe it is weird kind of seeing now that everything that has transpired at 154 pounds. It's interesting kind of just looking back on the great stuff, the great moments that we've had, and just it's not the end of an era. But it feels like we've now moved past to the climax. Now we're almost getting to that epilogue state. What happens now with Jermell Charlo? Obviously, he's probably going to have to fight Erickson Lubin. That fight is probably going to get ordered next because it doesn't look like there's going to be any mandatories from the WBA or the IBF anytime soon. So we'll see. It's interesting. I loved, I've long thought that Jermell Charlo was going to be Jason Rosario by knockout. I wasn't expecting a jab to the body to end things. And Really, one of the things that I was really looking at this fight was how was Jason Rosario going to corner Jermell Charlo? And as you mentioned, the blueprint for beating Jermell Charlo, it's somewhat there. But the problem with Jason Rosario was he was walking down Jermell. The problem is he was not cutting off the ring. He was walking him down, but Jermell Charlo was still effortlessly, for the most part, walking around in circles around Jermell Charlo. Jason Rosario, I should say. And Rosario, there were times where I thought he should have let his hands go a little more. Especially you look at that fourth round where Jermell wasn't really throwing a whole lot. He threw like 9 punches in the first 2 minutes. And Jason Rosario didn't really do that much either. He didn't cut off the ring. All he was doing was walking Jermell Charlo down. And this was, I don't want to say this was, this was not the best performance from Jason Rosario. I thought that he could have done more, especially at being able to limit Jermell Charlo. Because Charlo's not unbeatable. There are ways to beat him. It just takes an exceptional boxer to be able to do everything that's needed to beat Jermell Charlo.
Yeah, and the one thing that Charlo did do in this fight that I thought was pretty clever on his part, and I think it may have frustrated Rosario to a small extent, where the one thing he was doing when Rosario was trying to cut the ring off on him, or when he would try to come in closer, had to corner him off, he would clinch. And once he clinched, the referee had to come in and then break them up, and then Charlo had his free space to roam around the ring again. It was the one thing that was low-key one of my favorite things about the third and fourth rounds of that fight, were because Ron Hudson versus Carlos is that those rounds, Charlo may have thrown, I'll give or take the over-under 10 punches, maybe 15. But out of those 15, there were punches either out of the clinch or out of that corner to back off Rosario. It was the one interesting thing about that, where I guess everyone's realized this, where I think even Charlo knows this as well, where everyone's just going to copy this Harrison blueprint. So he's just going to go. It's a classic move where you just clinch and make your own space. But the one thing with Rosario that I do wonder if that first knockdown may have done something out of him, because he just was not the same guy for the most part in this fight after that slip. And I don't know if the shot actually hit him on the actual top of the head where it looked like it was, but it looked like him on the back of the ear, like back of the ear. So I don't know. It may have been something to it, but it just wasn't. This wasn't the same guy that upset J-Rock. I'll tell you that much.
No, not at all. All right, so that about does it for the Charlo doubleheader portion of the podcast. It was a very, very long show, but an even longer weekend. But luckily, not a whole lot else that's truly notable. It was a 6-hour show, 6.5-hour show.
Yeah, that started at.
But we got other fights in Europe. We actually had a couple of very interesting fights. Josh Taylor versus Abinun Konsong for the unified WBA and IBF junior welterweight titles. Taylor attacked the body, exposed the fact that Abinun Konsong leaves himself open a lot. First round knockout. When are we going to get Jose Ramirez?
I hope we get it sooner or later. The issue with that fight, of course, it's on Ramirez's side of it, with the mandatory of Jack Catterall, who wants his chance and is not going to stall anymore. And I mean, that's what sanctioning bodies are for, is to make sure that these fights get happened and get ordered. We'll see. So being realistic, I think that fight has to happen first, which I think actually for Catterall is going to give him problems, because I think Ramirez's length is going to give him issues. But after that, we'll have that fight sometime down the line in 2021, finally. But no, the 2 minutes and 41 seconds of this Taylor Konsong fight, the one thing I recognized early was that even if that fight didn't end by that body shot in the first round, it wasn't going to go probably no more than 2 to 3 rounds tops, because Konsong had absolutely no answer for Taylor inside. And that's kind of what happened with this fight and why it ended, because Konsong went for a punch. Pretty much Taylor got underneath him, hit him with a body shot, and then you saw him fall and then start rolling around. And that was pretty much the fight in a nutshell, where they sent him to the hospital as well to check on a cracked rib. And it's like, Taylor mentioned after the fight, like, yeah, I knew what he was going to do right away out of the first 2 seconds of the bell once the bell rang. So it was like, all right, so if he already knew what was happening, then it was pretty academic. But as you know, it's a mandatory defense. No one expected Konsong to actually do too much in this fight, but I was reading, and the greatness of credit to Fight Ghost on Twitter, one of the many gambling folks on Twitter in terms of boxing stuff, because that's way above my pay grade. He mentioned the first round knockout for Taylor was paying 22-1. So, wow. and I'm not a gambling guy or knows how money works, but that's a lot of money in Thailand. So I'm not saying the fix was in because he had to go to the hospital for cracked ribs, but that's kind of what happened with the first round knockout with this one.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So we now move on to the World Boxing Super Series Cruiserweight Finals. Thank God it's finally over. Thank God we can finally put an end to this second season.
2 years in the making.
2 years. We're done with this. I don't want to say second rate, but let's be honest, this is a poor man's version of the first season of the World Boxing Super Series because we didn't have Usyk. We didn't have Muragassiev. We had Andrew Tabiti.
Yeah.
And we had the finals between Mairis Briadis and Juniel Dorticos, the two guys that weren't able to make it to the finals in the first tournament. And if you had seen the first fight between the finals of the first tournament between Alexander Usyk and Muragassiev, where you saw Usyk, his technical prowess, his jab, and just overall better boxing ability completely neutralize Muragassiev's power. This was, like this whole tournament, a poor man's version of that fight. Muragassiev was a better boxer. Dorticos was carrying a lot of power. There were times, especially in the first half of the fight, where Dorticos was connecting on some very good power shots. But the problem here is that Dorticos doesn't really have much beyond the power that he has. Briadis is a fine, skilled, technical boxer at cruiserweight, and Briadis ended up winning the fight by majority decision, oddly enough. 117-111 on two of the scorecards, and then 114-114 on the third judge scorecards, and that's one of the more perplexing scorecards of this entire day, of this crazy, crazy day of boxing. Obviously, first of all, God, there better not be a third Cruiserweight tournament, because you've already got that. I thought going into a second Cruiserweight tournament so soon was just go down the well way too soon, one too many times. But now you have Gassiev as the definitive number one guy at Cruiserweight. Obviously, you can make a small case for Ilunga Makabu for the WBC Cruiserweight champion. But there's no doubt that that Briadis is the number one guy. The question is he going to follow Usyk and Gassiev and go to the heavyweight division?
If I was at any cruiserweight right now, and after watching that tournament, I'd make the first protein shake to get back up to 200 pounds plus, because there's no reason for you to stay, to be honest with you. The one thing about this fight that I thought was really interesting, not from the actual ring, it's the fight itself, because the fight itself, as you mentioned before, was pretty much by the numbers, where nothing out of the ordinary happened. Dorticos didn't have anything outside of just the occasional counter shot, and that was cool for spots, but it's not going to win you any rounds, and he didn't win enough rounds except for the one judge who strangely had it 6 rounds to 6 from
no idea how the hell could anyone see Dorticos fight and think, oh yeah, he won half of the rounds.
Yeah, he didn't have enough output from half the rounds to justify winning half these rounds. So I don't know really what fight that was watching. There's been some bad scorecards pretty much for most of some of these Germany cards as well. Like the fight card in Latavia was not very good either with stuff like that. But no, but this Dorticos fight, I was like, it is what it was. Congrats to Briadis for winning, by the way. Mm-hmm. And him winning erases that Gloraki debacle with Robert Bird, the worst officiated fight I've ever seen in my lifetime last year that happened. So he won this one fair and square. But what happens for him here is that it's probably going to set up a rematch at this point, because I think Gloraki is going to face the winner of him facing, I think it's Lawrence O'Cole on that fight sooner or later at one of these matchroom cards. So the winner of that, I'm sure, is going to want to unify, and here we are with Briadis again. So if dollars and donuts, we're going to get that fight one way or another again. Just hope Robert Bird's not around for it. Yeah. But to any other cruiserweight in that division right now, if you can get a fight with Makabu, good luck. I think he fought, actually, Carlos, remember, he fought during the pandemic, actually, and I want to say they had one that was like weird, like of our country world tent setups, which I thought was kind of cool, where they fight pretty much in someone's backyard with a boxing ring set up in a barbecue pit. But despite that weirdness going on, but I really don't want to see another version of this cruiserweight or this World Boxing Super Series stuff again. And this took long enough for this to end, and this was kind of long and strenuous enough. I don't know. And they were, Kayla Sutherland was joking about having a heavyweight version of this.
It's never gonna happen. It's never
gonna
happen.
I know we're talking late, and we're in this one of those things. But even I'm not that delusional to think that's going to happen. I don't know on any given day of the week.
Hell, I'm not confident there's even going to be a season 3 because season 1, a lot of its issues was poor marketing in the U.S. and the lack of a broadcast deal. The second season, they fixed that. The problem here was they messed up literally everything else. Fighters weren't getting paid. Fighters wanted to get out. Things kept getting delayed.
Fighters were suing to get out.
We're almost in 2021, and this tournament started in 2018, and this was an 8-man tournament. Like, you talk about the failed logistics at times with the Super 6 tournament. It's got nothing on what the hell we just witnessed throughout this entire second season. And I wasn't even concerned with one tournament. It was across the multiple tournaments that we had here. I love the concept of the World Boxing Super Series. I really do. And I want it to succeed. They're going to have to fix so many issues that I'm not even sure it's financially worth it or logistically worth fixing.
I don't think it's, at the end of the day, I just don't think it's financially feasible unless it's something that they can control, like in-house, which is like the MTK Global Golden Contract Tournament kind of thing, where they kind of have all these guys in-house and they can fight along. Unless it's under those restraints, it's going to be damn near impossible, especially in this day and age, because there's just too much money. There's too much money involved. That's really what it comes down to. And the big problem with the World Boxing Super Series is they didn't have any way of making sure the money was still there because people were suing and injunctioning themselves to get out of these fight cards, which is a shame, actually, because on paper, Carlos, it's like anybody else. Who doesn't like tournaments to prove that who's the best out of the best? Because these tournaments show that the best fight the best in one way or another. But if there's no money for these guys to fight, why the hell would they sign up? So I get it.
And really, and at this point, if you're going to do season 3, let's be honest, you're going to have to go down the European well, because any American fighter or fighter who's promoted by American, they're not going to touch this tournament with a 10-foot pole. Like, not at all. Lou DiBella probably has lost years of his life just dealing with the stress that came with dealing with this tournament.
I think Lou DiBella lost money just in lawyer fees and filings just because of this tournament. Actually, that's why I have a feeling that any American fighter stateside that's dealing with this fight, this whole concept is not going to sign up for it. That's why I find it's going to be really interesting how they're going to find that, and also what weight class would sign up for this at this point. It's going to have to be a weight class that really has a bunch of guys that we don't know, like the cruiserweight division. I mean,
can't do another one, man. Can't do a third one. I can't handle a third one.
I mean, unless they can find enough guys at minimum weight to do this, I have no idea who they're going to pick up off to sign up for this stuff, because it's going to be one of those fight cards where it's like,
the problem is you're going to do a minimum weight fight. Like, if you don't find a way to secure knockout CP Freshmar versus Juan Menayotin, it's not even worth it.
It's a lost cause. Yeah, it's a lost cause. That's true. Yeah, but I really don't know how they're going to pull this off again. I mean, it's a great concept, and I applaud their efforts for it, but no, I think that it took them 4 years to get this one finally out of the books. We can move on from this stuff.
Yeah. T_20 on the live chat says, Charlo made nude fans tonight. I don't know which Charlo you're referring to, but I'm pretty sure both Charlos made a ton of fans. I mean, both guys, in my opinion, are the top guys in their respective weight class, which is something that you wouldn't say even 6 months ago, but here we are. I do think Jamal is the best at middleweight right now, discounting Canelo Alvarez. And I think Jermell Charlo undoubtedly is the best guy at 154 pounds.
I know for a fact that I think he's talking about Jermell, if I had to guess, mainly because that knockout is going to be in everyone's top 10 knockouts of the year highlight reels.
Yeah.
It's personally one of my favorites now because it's a liver shiver. And anytime you get a body shot knockdown, I'm all for it.
And not just that, the simplicity of it all. And it was just, it didn't look like like, it wasn't not the hardest jab Jermell Charlo has thrown in his life. Hell, it wasn't even the hardest jab he's thrown in this fight. And it was just the absolute most accurate jab that Jermell Charlo has thrown in his life. And let's be honest, if you can end the fight that way in a title unification in the main event of a pay-per-view, you deserve to have knockout of the year considerations.
Yeah, you're the man at this point. Let's be honest. That's pretty good. And it's like, and it's one of those punches, Carlos, I don't think we're going to see anything like that remotely close for a long time. Like, I couldn't even tell you the last time I've seen a body shot jab like that in a fight in that kind of fashion, because as you mentioned before, it wasn't like the strongest punch in the world. It may have been like the 15th best jab it may have been the 50th best jab we've seen on this fight card, and it hit the show. So I'm always wondering about that, and it's always wondering what, especially but back to his point of making new fans. This card up and down, despite the Neri fight, I think made new fans one way or another if they pay for this event. Let's be honest, even if he didn't pay for his event, if you saw the fight somehow, some way, I don't care how you did it, this fight made you a fan one way or another.
Don't tell us.
Hey, the views of how you view it do not reflect those of Carlos Toro Media, Marquise Johnson, Fight Weekend, and its affiliates. But however you saw the fight tonight, guys, this fight made you a fan one way or another.
All right, so let's go back a day. And just, you and I both watched this live. We both watched this with plenty of friends. And, man, I just still cannot get my head. I was explaining to all of this madness to my girlfriend this morning, and she was completely flabbergasted. Yeah. For those of you who don't know what the hell we're talking about, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. and Jr. fought in Tijuana, Mexico last night on the Zone. Yeah. And if you had told me which was going to be the more noteworthy fight, the one with the retired almost 60-year-old, or the guy that everyone has essentially convinced is just one giant meme in boxing. Holy crap, that night was insane. So, first of all, let's start with what is somehow not the main event. Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. versus Jorge Arce in a third fight of their trilogy of exhibition bouts. Yeah. And had it not been for Jermell Charlo versus Sergey Derevyanchenko, I have no problem saying this exhibition fight where the combined age was, I think, 99, it was like 99 years old. That fight was the best fight of the weekend.
You know what's funny you mentioned that, and it's not only was the best fight of the weekend, and it would have been on my end, Carlos, but I was led, as you know, boxing Twitter led me astray Saturday morning when I woke up about this fight. Someone pointed out to me that the ending of this fight was the exact same ending as the second exhibition, even down to the referee breaking up the fight. And I was like, oh man, they gave us the same dusty finish in this boxing fight, but nonetheless,
I'm convinced it's now a work. This has to be a work.
They worked us into a shoot.
Yeah, this is a worked shoot. I'm now convinced of that. And you know what?
Yeah,
this was better than most of the fights on this card on tonight. Not that some of the fights were bad, but it's just that the 4 rounds between these two old men were really, really good. The pacing was amazing.
That's what it was. I think the pace of these fights was just ridiculous because these old guys were just swinging at each other like for the fences. Because, I mean, it helps to have headgear, but even with that, like, you have to hear that. You have to feel that some way or another. And it was one of those fights with this exhibition because it played like the second one where they just start throwing at each other. And the one thing that I was intrigued about this was I didn't realize that they actually scored an exhibition like this with an actual winner or a loser. I thought it was an exhibition, so it doesn't really matter. Like, at the end of the day, it's still for funsies. But apparently, they gave of course, Chavez the win because, I mean, his name was on the ring and he's the marquee and his hotel was sponsoring the event. I mean, the list goes on and on. But at the end of the day, it all goes back to Chavez Sr. But yeah, I thought that was interesting too, but no, those guys were throwing down. It actually made for a lot more fun than I expected to watch in an exhibition. Because Carlos, let's be honest, most often, not with these fight exhibitions, these fight exhibitions suck. Like they're boring sparring sessions. The guys just stand at each other. They do a weird stare down thing. It kind of fringes on like bad wrestling, like lead up to pay-per-views where the guys just like do like the weird face-off thing for like 20 minutes too long, and it's like, okay, like are you guys gonna throw, or are you gonna keep staring at each other and not blinking? It's a lot of that stuff, and it's like, no, this was not that. No, this was actually fun. Actually, that fight on Friday may have been low-key one of my favorite things this weekend, despite this great pay-per-view card up and down by Showtime. Only for the simple reason that these guys would have combined an age of, you're saying 99. I'm going to round up. That's a century in my book. We're just still throwing love at each other.
Yeah, first of all, I am not in favor of guys that old just hitting each other in a boxing room. Just not a fan, but I will give Chavez and Arce all the credit in the world for taking this fight infinitely more seriously than Chavez Jr., who, despite literally everything that one could do to totally F up his career, he is somehow still a relevant fighter. To an extent, a relevant fighter. And listen, I have no problem saying Chavez Jr. got to this point because of his dad, because of his last name. Because literally, if this was any other fighter, if Chavez did not carry that same name, no chance he would have gotten a pay-per-view fight against Canelo Alvarez. No way he was going to get a 7-figure payday against Danny Jacobs. After all the drug failures, after all the shadiness, after all the undisciplines, after all the fucking disappointment that he has given us ever since he lost to Sergio Martinez, he still finds a way to get us to talk about him. That's the amazing part. And let's summarize everything that's happened with Chavez Jr. in his fight, which was literally this sign. You want to talk about wrestling, a noteworthy name, and you put him against a nameless jobber who's supposed to win in 2-3 minutes just so you can look good.
The guy already in the ring before the music starts.
Yes. What we called the jobber entrance.
Yes.
The fact that this guy, Mario Abel Cázares, he was coming into the fight with an 11-0 record. One of those wins was against a guy with a winning record. The other 10 were up against guys with more losses than wins, were making their pro debut, or just flat out didn't have a win into their pro careers. And this guy, somehow, was able to really do well against Julio Cesar Chavez. 2, the referee doing everything in his power to help out Chavez. 3, deduct points for a bogus, almost non-existent head clash. 4, literally everything about this whole scenario. They were in Tijuana. Chavez Sr. was fighting on this card. Literally, there was a script for how this was supposed to happen. Hell, I'm pretty sure that the reason why he got deducted points, why Cáceres was deducted points, was because he was doing well. We were joking about it, but I genuinely do think he was deducted points because he did well. Because let's be honest,
got to a rhythm.
Everything about this just smelled of shade. And then when the fight got stopped, was stopped because Chavez complained of a boo-boo cut that was not like.
How bad, Carlos, is it that eye cut that he complained of to stop that fight yesterday compared to the face of Derevyanchenko in this first main event?
Vasquez.
Yes.
Literally, how do you look at Chavez Jr.? Look at Chavez Jr.'s face from last night. Now look at Vasquez and Derevyanchenko. I don't like saying fighters quit. But I will say this. Chavez Jr. didn't want to be there. He had no interest whatsoever. And after saying all of that, this was set up to be Chavez Jr. win. Hell, when they stopped the fight, we saw the replays. The cut was caused by an uppercut.
Yeah, a pretty good one too.
A pretty damn good one too. Even the commentary, I was telling you in our group chat the night last night, they were talking at first. This is probably going to be a cut resulted by a knockout, and the general rule says it should be a stoppage. Well, it depends, but obviously commissions have different rules and everything's different. Point of the matter is, it should have been stopped. It should have been a TKO win for Cáceres. Then they go out and say, "Oh hey, no, it was accidental headbutt. We're going to the scorecards," and we all thought, every single one of us thought Chavez Jr. was somehow gonna get
the fix was in.
Like the fix was in. Like Alejandro Rochin was scoring this fight. I'm like, holy crap! Like how that? Like he's still somehow gonna anti-Murphy's Law himself back to relevancy. And he actually lost.
He lost.
Hell, Alejandro Rochin's card was the one that actually was 6-0 in favor of Cáceres. The only reason why he was 59-54 was because of the bogus point deduction.
Yeah. And it's funny where it's like, you would have thought that, because that fight up and down had the makings of Chavez Jr. winning this fight by any means necessary. Like, they stacked the deck. It was weird because on the promotional stuff for all leading up to this fight, Carlos, last time I checked, the main event was supposed to be Senior and Traveso in the exhibition that
was the advertised main event.
That was the advertising. That was over the banner. Even the commercials leading back into the Chavez Jr. fight had Chavez Senior Traveso. So having said that, and then like you see that fight, his son's fight went on last, and then we saw typical JCC at this point, where if you saw the fight he had against Daniel Jacobs, you missed absolutely an extension of this fight here with that, because it literally picked up the sixth round of that fight where this one picked up once the bell rang, almost even down to the weird interest of him coming in. But the one thing that bothers me about that fight still, and I cannot figure out what the issue with it was, the tape that Chavez Jr. was wearing.
Oh my god!
Can we talk about that? Yeah, let's talk about that right quick, because it was like this weird. I don't know if he was ever covering up like a bad tattoo, or he had some work done, or if it was one of those weird back mural things. But he was using carpenter's tape, and the tape that I have literally sitting on the other side of me here, talking to you, and it's like, all right, and I'll tell you where I don't put that tape on my back. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of weird.
And the worst part of it is, the blue tape that he had across his back, it was actually holding two other tapes that were somehow camouflaged into his skin. That for some reason that still not even, it doesn't even explain why he was even wearing those tapes to begin with. And now he's wearing this blue tape that's holding those two tapes in. It was so bizarre. It's
so weird.
I swear, I think Chavez saw how some WWE wrestlers had I forgot what it's the tape that you put on your shoulders that kind of it helps you recover a little bit if you're coming out of surgery or from an injury or something like that. I forgot what they're called. And he thought to himself, you know what? I'll make myself look presentable, and then just looks at a piece of pink tape and just all right, that's good enough for me. I'm sure no one will notice. And I literally couldn't focus on the fight because of that damn tape. I could not focus.
No, it was wacky, and it was only wackier only because they like Chavez Jr. in that fight, for all intents and purposes, wasn't doing much of anything. Like, if there's any, despite all the questionable surroundings of that fight, the one thing that this fight did get right was the scoring of it, surprisingly.
Amazing.
And yeah, despite it's your cliche, Carlos. A broken clock's right twice a day, and this is one of those times that clock was right, and it's like, man. And I'm kind of glad, actually, because I think had in a bizarre event, and this would have been one of those weird, bizarro events, had Chavez Jr. won this fight, because it's being in Mexico, who knows if this would have been counted or not. That's problem one.
I think the rest of the world is will I think now, especially now, I think the rest of the world will love to count that.
Yeah, now they're gonna scrap everything else in Mexico, but that fight's still a loss. No, everyone saw that. That's one of those things. And two, I really think had Chavez Jr. won that fight, that was going to set up some bizarre scenario where he was going to face like Sergio Martinez, and I want no part of that at this point. So him losing makes it a lot better. Having said that, I don't want the guy who wanted to face Sergio Martinez either. I don't want Sergio Martinez in the ring anymore. But
and we may be talking a lot about this fight, but it's only because one, it was so unbelievable.
It was a spectacle.
And two, I'm getting this all out of the way because I genuinely don't think we're ever going to talk about Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. again. I think this is it. I think this is it for Chavez Jr. If he fights again, cool. There should be no interest in Chavez Jr. Chavez Jr. doesn't even want to fight. Like, he doesn't love boxing. Like, you can clearly tell that from his body language. You could tell by the way he acts. You could tell by how he wanted to get out of that fight from a bogus cut. And look, and listen, I don't know, fighters' pain tolerance, it's different. Maybe it did legitimately affect him. But you look at the cut he had, and you look at what we saw tonight. It's hard not to say he wanted an out and thought he could somehow either get a DQ win or a technical decision on the cards because he thought, and let's be honest, we all thought the fix was in.
Yeah, and I really do think because that cut, because it reminded me too much of the Jacobs fight where he was looking for a way out of that one. Because at that point, at least to Chavez's credit on that fight with the one with Jacobs, had he not got a way out of that one, he was going to get knocked out. So I'll give him credit for that part of it. But this one, it just looked like he just did not want to beat her, and it's weird because I really think with Chavez, I hope. And I sincerely hope, Carlos, that this is the end of all of this. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, we know we're in boxing, so we know how this boxing stuff works. He may disappear for about 4 months, and then we'll see him on Instagram, training in in someone's hammock, punching a Ninja Turtles inflatable. So who knows? But I'm really hoping that this will be the end of that. But it just begs the question, though, like in terms of legacies, how awful is the way to go out if you're Chavez Jr. and if this is your last hurrah. Like, this whole string is one of the worst scenarios you can think of.
This will arguably go down as the biggest fall from grace, maybe of the 21st century. Like, you go from a guy who was a legitimate world champion, and this guy, he was beating good guys. He beat Andy Lee. That's not a small feat to do. And then you go to the Sergio Martinez fight. And I don't know if it was directly because of the way he lost. But after the Sergio Martinez fight, his life is, well, I don't want to say his life. I'm not going to comment on his life. But his entire professional career completely unraveled and spiraled into just complete madness and chaos. And the problem is, there was never a time where Chavez was able to just effectively find himself as a boxer since the Martinez loss. He was just doing like, all right, I'll fight Andre Fonfara. I'll go to 175. I can't make a 168. I'll fight Canelo at a catch weight that I'm going to be super drained to do. I'll fight Danny Jacobs at super middleweight. Like, everything. And not even make weight. And
not even make weight.
Like, there was never a period where you, after the Martinez loss, and you just think to yourself, okay, we're going to have to start right from the very beginning. Start from square one. And I know fighters who's been at the top don't want to do that. But that's what Chavez Jr. needed. He needed to start from scratch, start from the very, very beginning, and work his way back. Like, not just talking about like an Erickson Lubin type of deal where he just wins 3 or 4 fights, wins a title eliminator, and gets the title shot. No, I'm talking like goes on a very lengthy run where he just builds confidence, actually properly learns how to fight, maybe even rediscover his love for boxing. Because all the fights that he's had, all the drug tests, all the discipline issues, it was further amplified by all these series of strange fights and strange combination of opponents that he's had in the last several years.
Yeah, and it's weird because you'd think him being, just based out of Mexico, where he can just fight in Mexico and just work his way back up. Probably in terms of having the least amount of resistance, I can't think of any other location you can do that in besides Mexico, where you could probably be the easiest 24-0, and you would not know the 24 people that the guy faced, or if it's the same person over again, or if it actually was an actual sanctioned fight. I mean, the list was on and on how to get back to it. But either way, he could have had the opportunity and the name to get back to it with the cachet, but no, he just went on this weird spiraling out, this weird spiral, like downhill. And it just seems like, especially with the Jacobs fight, because for me, the Jacobs fight was just one of those things where it's like, this fight should have happened at that point. And and it's weird because they had a contingency plan in place, but they moved it from Vegas. They fought in Arizona, and then he quit there, and then it's so funny. Like that fight is known for 2 things, Carlos. It was the end of an era for me personally for Junior there, and also the end of Brian Kinney, because that was Brian Kinney's last fight on the zone, was him getting thrown in a Bud Light bottle. That was his exit.
Ran all the way to doing fights with Lennox Lewis and Joe Goosen on Fox.
Yeah, he took the exit route all the way there, and it's like, man. So like, but back to with JCC, I really wonder like what could have been with that, but he just needed a period. I just think he just really needed a period away from all of this, where if he had a chance to get away from this, to regroup, refocus, maybe be re-energized into it. That way you have more focus onto it. Maybe that will help some of this, but I just think at this point he's really just doing this because either his dad's making him do it, or he doesn't want to be disowned from the family. That's my only theory at this point, why he's still getting back into the ring.
Yeah, so I wish I had some type of drink or something just because a cheers to a career, because it's never going to recover from this point. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't. But I highly doubt that I'm gonna be wrong on this. The career's done.
I think
maybe he'll fight a few more times, but it's done. It's completely done.
Yeah, maybe he'll be like one of the side events on one of these, one of these like these lower tier box Azteca shows later on next year when no one really pays too much attention. That way they can hide him. That way they can hide him under the prospects and along those lines. But I think this is it. Well,
we somehow managed to recap a very, very long weekend of fights, and we only covered like the notable fights. Like this was a huge weekend of fights, and I wish we could talk about it more, but it's 3:11 a.m. on the East Coast. Well, we're both because you live in Tampa. I live in Cleveland.
Beautiful Tampa.
And it was a long night of fights. But it was a fun night.
I will admit.
But it was a
fun night of fights, though.
Fun night of fights. Marquise, where can the fine people of boxing find you?
You can find Carlos. They can find me on the internet at Weak Sauce Radio on Twitter. I'm always on there harassing somebody, either media, boxing fans, trolls, whoever. If you have an Avi and a Twitter profile and you respond to me, I respond back. That's how that works. It's kind of funny when people get confused about that, like, oh, he responded back. Like, yeah, it's what I do. It's the internet. It's how it works. But you can find me there on there. BigFightWeekend.com is where you can find my writings and recaps of everything with the world of boxing, past, present, future. We do news recaps. Pretty much wrote a couple recaps of the fights this past weekend. I've wrote about this one, working on things over the weekend for next week. You can also find me as well with doing the podcast every Thursday at 5 o'clock on Facebook Live via Podcast Detroit. Make sure I got the wording correctly here. The Joe Louis Bourbon, the Making of Champions podcast. We usually have a guest on there every so weekly. We just had recently on Clay Collard, the O Snatcher Clay Collard. That's his new monkey now. You can all drop that Cassius bit. He's going by the O Snatcher now. So he's looking forward to that. As we talked to him about his fight because he's fighting on the Lomachenko Lopez card. He's on the ESPN Plus portion of it, which is actually looking like a very stacked card, by the way, in terms of top ranked shows, which as you know, Carlos, they've been doing shows literally through the pandemic and not. And the fact that they're having a stacked card like this, which is Lopez Lopez, is pretty impressive considering that we've sat through some of these bubble shows where I've sat through entertaining infomercials at one point. But that card's gonna be interesting. But he's fighting, and then we talked to him about that. He's also building on his neck of the woods a new gym in his own neck of the woods in beautiful Burley, Idaho. So we talked to him about that. His upcoming fight with Quincy Lavalius, and how he's trying to revenge his split draw. And he lays out how he's trying to get that fight, his win back from that split draw, because he got pretty much the guy had some home cooking in a fight in Louisiana last year, which sounds pretty accurate. And that's the case with him. We talked to him. We talked to various other fighters as well. But you can catch me doing that. And outside of that, pretty much wherever you can find me on the internet, just Google Marquise Johns Boxing. Unfortunately, this face will pop up. So that's how it works nowadays.
And of course, you can find me on Twitter at CarlosToro360. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can subscribe to this channel at Carlos Toro Media. Obviously, we got plenty of stuff from the boxing world on this channel already. Brief chats with Jermall Charlo and Brandon Figueroa moments after they picked up their wins tonight on the Showtime pay-per-view. And obviously, I spoke to Bob Arum during the Josh Taylor, Apinon Kansung press conference earlier in the week. Yeah. So obviously, lots of good stuff. Hopefully, I can bring you more. And this week, I will be putting out an interview with Xavier Martinez of Mayweather Promotions. They're going to be fighting on Showtime on October 10th. Very, very tough fight against Claudio Marrero. I'm actually pretty excited for that one.
That's going to be interesting if you're talking to Xavier Martinez, because that guy is a machine. And if you have not seen him on any of these Mayweather shows on ShowBox the last year and a half, he has been absolutely mauling down his competition. Like, I think the last fight he had on Showtime were they were about to explain the fight. It was a first round stoppage. Yep. Where I think Steve Farhood flat out said, like, I couldn't even read my notes. Like, that was his exact words in the fight before he knocked him out, like before the fight was over. And I was like, yeah, that's how this guy does. And he swings with bad intentions. And I remember, like, thinking of Xavier Martinez, there was a fight he had I want to say it was last year, where he faced I want to say it was Plana. I can't remember the guy's last name, but the post-fight conference that he had with the quotes that I got from the media stuff, Carlos, I think Martinez's quote was, "When the bell rings, it's go time. I'm trying to get the hell home, and I'm going to knock this guy out." Was the exact word they quoted Xavier Martinez on. So I'm actually looking forward to hearing what you talk to him about, because I got such a fun guy to talk to.
Yeah, he is. He's a very, very interesting guy, very good fighter, one of the better prospects at 130 pounds. If he beats Claudio Marrero, that's no joke. Claudio Marrero's top 15 guy at 130 pounds. Make a strong case that a win over Claudio Marrero, you're in the contender status.
Yeah. And if he's facing Claudio Marrero, that's a tough fight considering where Marrero's been. And we'll see how that works, because that's a huge step up of him. I wonder how that's going to be a good one. And that's on October 10th. So he's fighting on the same card. That's the Showtime card, correct? So he's fighting on the same card as Sergey Lipinets. He's on that card. So that's be a fun one to look at, actually.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting night of action on Showtime. But it's 3:16 a.m. and it's I think it's time for all of us to go to bed. Doesn't matter if you're on the East Coast. It doesn't matter if you're in Pacific time. It's past midnight in Pacific time. So let's all go to bed and let's all process this big night of boxing. So I'm Carlos Toro, he's Marquise Johns, and I hope you guys have a great evening. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and hope you enjoy the rest of your boxing days.